This week, we resume our discussion of Jack Kirby's 1970s work, looking at the first 5 issues of the 2001 A Space Odyssey series. Due to concerns about rights, Kirby's orders were to avoid creating any new ongoing characters. Within these confines, he manages to come up with something that's fairly interesting, but you might not expect it to be widely popular. Emmet and I discuss the first 5 issues coming up. As always, a reminder that you can support the podcast by pledging a few bucks a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or if you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. This is Tim.
This is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Emmet is back. Yay!
Yay! Also, the kangaroos are back. Yay!
Oh, really? Are they bombing your place again?
It is everywhere. I just had a conversation with my partner, and she was like, "Okay, you need to get a rake, and you need to go through the garden, and you need to rake it all up because it's everywhere." So I got lots of kangaroo poop. For those listening who haven't maybe been part of the Emmet's journey in country Australia, I discovered that when you wake up in the morning and go outside, kangaroos poop outside your back door. That's something that happens in country Australia, which is where I am.
Right. Yeah, somewhere not too far from Melbourne, I guess.
Yes.
I've never been there, but...
We keep it vague.
An undisclosed location.
Undisclosed location. Somewhere within the Victorian state.
So, our listeners on YouTube have been, kind of pushing for Get to Kirby again. So,
we're back.
I noticed on my Libsyn stats that there is something tracking YouTube listens, and the episode we did about the 2001 movie adaptation got the average minutes of listening for that episode were much longer than for the other episodes. So this is a popular topic.
I mean, think about it from the sort of YouTube, Google SEO analytic algorithmic machine. You scored a triple there because you have Jack Kirby, you have Stanley Kubrick, and you have Arthur C. Clarke, right? So boom, 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 all in one go. So I'm sure all sorts of algorithms are pointing people to that episode.
Must have been, but also it seemed like people didn't give up after 5 minutes either. They kept listening. So
that's good. That's good. That's the
so anyway. So Emmet's back from vacation, and we're finally back to Jack Kirby, and we're jumping ahead a little bit. If going chronologically, we wouldn't quite have gotten to this quite yet, but I thought, well, let's go ahead and look at the 2001 series that Kirby did. We're doing the first 5 issues of the 10 this time, and we'll get the other 5 next time. And then we'll go back.
Which is where we get... the next 5 is when we get to the exciting moment of Machine Man, or I'm sorry, Mr. Machine.
Mr. Machine, right.
But yes, these first 5 issues include maybe one of my favorite Kirby comics.
Okay. But yeah, then we'll do these 10 issues in 2 episodes, and then we'll go back and get the start of the Eternals and more Captain America and so forth. So when we talked about the movie adaptation, I mentioned there was a Wired magazine article, I'll link to it again, Crazy Legacy of Jack Kirby's Forgotten 2001 A Space Odyssey, and it mentions that in the series, Marvel wasn't sure whether any recurring characters he might create would become the property of MGM or if they'd be Marvel property. So they said, don't have any recurring characters, which is really kind of limiting. And you can see the limits on him here that, he eventually gave up on and created Mr. Machine. But I mean, the first 2 issues are basically theme and variations on 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's kind of the same plot points. It's somebody in the distant past, not monkeys, not cavemen, kind of in the first case, and then he jumps ahead a little bit, but it's still very early days of humanity, and somebody encounters the monolith and makes some kind of advances in technology, and then we jump ahead to the year 2001, and there's a direct ancestor of that person from the past, and they see the monolith, and they suddenly find themselves in a pleasant environment, and then they rapidly age and they become a star child. So
with one exception, but I don't.
Well,
know if
the first 2 issues they do, in the next story after that, it's a little different, but
it's a little. He starts introducing variations, and I don't recall if I brought this up the last time. I'm sure I would have, but it's also very similar to the adaptation of David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas by the Wachowskis, where you have these characters across centuries, and we see them in the far future and the far distant past, and the same actors keep playing the different iterations of the character moving through time. And they're different people, but they're clearly meant to be, it's like the same soul that's been reincarnated again and again. And we chart whether or not that soul actually becomes redeemed or becomes more corrupt and more evil and more violent. And there's a similar idea here, which is this notion of human evolution being somehow connected to a form of reincarnation or spiritual evolution. And with the encounter with the monolith, which sets in motion the stories and then concludes the stories, is meant to demarcate a period of transcendence. So by the time we get to the future timeline, when the characters encounter the monolith, there's this idea of you're now going to transcend this mortal shell and you're going to become something else.
Yeah, he uses the word seed. I don't think that appears in like Clark's novel, but he's talking about like a seed for like the next, like a new race or something.
I believe the concept from the movie and the books is the Star Child. That's my memory, which also implies a new species. Which is what the sense in which seed is being used here. It's like a new seed that's going to plant in different soil and create a different species. So they're on the same parallel. But Kirby, in these limitations with these issues, it's fascinating as a sort of formulous exercise almost, because you can see him just going, all right, I'm just going to tell the same story in terms of these milestones of evolution, both physical and spiritual, and in doing so I'm going to anticipate how these things become part of our society. So the first one is Beast Killer, which connects violence to technology, which is exactly what Kubrick did. It's exactly the same,
right? Yeah,
sort of logical leap.
It's a caveman who develops the first. After he encounters the monolith, he develops the first knife and the first spear, and he's able to hunt better and
a more efficient killing tool, which then leads to space technology. Just jump in time. But Kirby doesn't have Kubrick's advantage of doing a quick cut. The second issue, though, is fascinating, though, because then we were introduced to Vera the She-Demon. We'll get to her. But there's this explicit connection between what she does and how government works, like how authority works. So I feel as if Kirby takes these limited scenarios and goes, all right, I'm going to say some things. All right, guys, you won't let me create a character for you. Okay, fine. I don't have my usual soapbox. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say that, violent unrest and, putting down people with force is a facet of government. That's kind of where he's coming from.
Yeah,
so it's
taxation.
really interesting. Yeah. So it just I just am fascinated. It's always the idea of if you limit a creative person, they come up with an innovation to break out of that box you've put them in. And that's what this comic is to me. It's Kirby straining against this, arbitrary limit, and we ultimately get Mr. Machine. But I find it like a fascinating failure, and I don't say failure in the sense of it's bad. I mean, in terms of I can see this not connecting with many people.
Yes, for sure. I've heard this story before.
Yeah, I can see this people just bouncing off this. Go, what is this? But I'm fascinated by it because it's this clear. All right, what can I do? And then he just walks us through it.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of readers after issue 2 just kind of giving up. It's like, is this going to be the same every time? They always become a star child?
Yeah. Where's the superheroes? Okay, you want your superheroes, kid? I'll give you superheroes. I'll give you all the superheroes you can handle. And it's incredible.
Yeah, so it is a little bit interesting that the second issue, the character is a woman. It's a little bit more of a variation on the original in changing the gender, but and the far past scenario keeps kind of creeping up a little bit in time, a little bit later. The second issue, when it's kind of like a Conan the Barbarian setting a bit.
Yeah, it's a bit Hyperborean. They have weapons now. They're in this sort of volcanic landscape.
It's said to be Italy, which is kind of interesting that every issue he tells where on Earth it's happening. Like the first one is the future site of New Orleans. Yeah. Second one's Italy. Third one is Greece. I'm thinking about, like, in the original 2001, I don't think we have any idea where those apes are hanging out, do we?
Wasn't it Africa, or was that just the book?
I guess you're right. The book, the movie doesn't explain much of anything, but I think the book does mention Africa, which has been thought of as the cradle of human civilization. So it would make sense to put it in Africa, I guess. But these are a little bit, a little later than that. They're actual humans, and they've spread out to, I don't know how many cavemen there were in the southern U.S. I don't know how, when did humans spread to that continent? I don't know.
Let's pretend it's Pangea. It's Pangea. They're everywhere.
What we've seen from other titles is Kirby does seem to do some research and try to get these things right. So he might have found something to support the idea that future New Orleans area was populated by early man. I don't know.
But also he's got the camel type creature. Mm-hmm. The sort of antecedent of the camel, which we would associate with Africa. So again, that sort of
I don't know what that's to it. I don't know what that's doing in New Orleans.
Maybe that speaks to the sort of Pangea theory, because even Kubrick, like, there was a lot of, why does he have tapirs in the film? Because they're not from Africa. Why is there tapers?
Well, the book said warthogs, I think. It was a different animal, and we were talking about maybe warthogs were harder to handle than tapirs. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably it. But everyone's going, this doesn't make sense. It's Pangea. Guys, it's Pangea. Don't worry about it. It was a big old mix-up. Everyone was everywhere. Literally.
Yeah, kangaroos in Canada.
Yeah, why not? Sure.
So then 3 and 4, we get a two-parter with this warrior named Merrick. And thanks to the monolith, which has originally appeared to this old man, not to Merrick, but Merrick kind of appropriates it or kind of gets some help, or uses the old man as kind of a conduit, right? Like, ask the monolith about this and that, and they make a lot of technological advancements, again, kind of war-related, shields and swords, And then the wheel at the end of the first issue, issue 3. In the fourth issue at the beginning, we're still in the distant past, and he runs into a queen named Jalessa who also has access to a monolith. So that's interesting. We've got two different characters who are both accessing the monolith.
Yeah.
And they end up joining forces, and then again, we jump ahead to the year 2001, and we've got Herb Merrick, who is on Space Station Liberty, the wheel-shaped station from the movie, which is being banged up by huge meteors. And everybody is evacuated from the station except him. He's like, is he going to go down with his ship? Is that the idea? I'm not
He's
sure.
meant to go down in the pod. He's meant to follow them, but he
doesn't.
Yeah.
And then the monolith shows up floating outside the station. So, as you do, he does a spacewalk to go out and take a look at it.
I got to take a look at this rock.
And sucked into it, and then he finds himself in the pleasant environment again, where he meets a woman who I guess is descendant of Jalessa. But the twist is that they are not rapidly aged and turned into star children. It's considered to be a random failure, it says. But I wasn't clear, why was this a failure? Why did they not meet expectations?
So this is interesting. So we've talked about this. Thank you for teeing this up, because this is exactly what I want to talk about. Okay. We have Beast Killer, we have Vera, and you've got this idea of this leads to this. And then you have Marek and his whole... he's explicitly identified in that end sequence as a romantic. They say, he's a romantic. He always wanted to live out this sort of fantasy. And we'll explore that more with Norton of New York in terms of what that can mean. But when you have his origin story, you brought it up where he actually doesn't encounter the monolith himself. He's introduced to the monolith by the older man. I thought, this is giving me King Arthur vibes. This is the idea of the warrior king who needs to be introduced to the magical realm by a sort of elder figure. And in doing so, he gains power, but he's never really Fae himself. Like Merlin is a magical creature. Merlin is aging backwards. He's becoming younger as he gets old.
Like Mork from Ork.
He is. And Arthur is sort of caught between two worlds. And in a sense, that's almost like a metaphor for romantic fantasy as a rule. There's this idea of power and adventure, but not dealing with the grim reality of what that means, or even just the earthbound reality of what power means. Still looking to the sky and imagining some sort of better tomorrow, be it fantasy, be it utopia, whatever it is. That's romance, and that's a element of romantic fiction, and romance in the sense not of lovers, but of the sense that Tolkien uses the word romance, which is flights of fancy. Fantastical adventure is a romance. King Arthur is a romance. Pilgrim's Progress maybe is a romance. I'm not sure. I'm not an English student. I'm getting off topic, but I thought that was really, really interesting. And then when we get to the end, where I would argue as well that the woman he meets who has also encountered the monolith, I would argue that she's Morgan Le Fay, but that's a whole other thing. He doesn't move forward because he is absorbed in the fantasy. He just wants to live in the fantasy, and that's why he doesn't progress. And that's an aspect of human nature as well, that there are people who just don't want to be here. They want to sort of experience this other world, and they will always and other world is a part of British mythology as well. But this idea of I want to be somewhere else, I don't want to be me. And in order for the sort of starseed transmogrification to take place, you need to give yourself over, and he won't. He wants to dwell in that little heaven that has been constructed for him. And I find that really interesting, just as a sort of critique of romantic fantasy. Like that's what I think Kirby's doing here. And like in issue 5, you actually have a character shouting at a bunch of other people in costume, "Oh, grow up," while he himself is dressed in costume. But that seems to be Kirby talking about this space he's in. He spends all his time making stories and working alongside other people making stories for fantasists. Like, what does that tell you about human nature if you spend all your time dealing in make-believe? What does that do? And I'm sure he had some thoughts about what that is if you get too enwrapped in it. Like, are you truly living in the day-to-day world? And what are you doing about tomorrow? Which, unfortunately, the violent psychopath who's like beating to death other tribespeople and animals is living for tomorrow. And that is, it's going to set the tenor for the future. The person who's so concerned with nightly, courtly fantasy, what are they doing? So I think that's why he doesn't move on, and that's why we see it's described as a failure. But it's an interesting failure. It's sort of a... I think the monolith does still allow for... There are people who just aren't going to leave this space we create for them. They're going to stay in it. And that's just another aspect of human nature.
Something I was just noticing here. I think I had misunderstood this a little bit. I took it as that the monolith had decided not to turn him into a Star Child, but that's not what it says. It says he does not respond to the aging speed process necessary to the transformation. He will live out his life at a normal rate. So it's something innate in him that he isn't affected by the process, and he stays the current rate of aging.
Yeah, and if we take it on that this is actually the King Arthur myth sort of being created in the experience of this character in the distant past, in ancient Greece, it's almost as if this story itself has never moved on. Like, it just keeps traveling forward in time. We're still talking about King Arthur. We're still talking about Merlin. We're still talking about Morgan Le Fay. So the fantasy never died. It stayed with us. And there's something in that too. We don't leave behind our stories. We keep them moving with us, and we maybe move them forward in time a bit. But like, they tend to keep us focused on the past in a way that we're distracted from the future. And I don't know if that's a sort of very vague definition of myth as a concern, but it's certainly what I think is being treated of here. And it's interesting that in all the other variations is forward momentum. Like the action of encountering the monolith spurs progress, and then it moves forward, and then we see a sort of end point to that, and then a transition. And in this one, no, it's moving backwards as well. It doesn't go forward; it goes backwards. He actually, even his fantasy world, because we see some of the characters have different like afterlives, if you like, is in that sort of idealized Grecian.
Yeah, well, I was noticing because in the beginning of the story, it points out that it's long before there were like white columns, I think he says, in Greece. But yeah, the setting of his new sort of reality looks very, ancient Greece-ish with the helmet the guy's wearing, and just everything is very, very much that. So it's a little bit advanced from his past life, but certainly from the point of view of 2001, it's still a long time ago. Where the other ones were not really in the past, right? Like the woman at the pool or whatever. It was her present day.
Yeah, it's sort of an idealized, familiar space for them. And the fellow being encouraged to walk home by the young child, like there's this sense of, oh yes, he has a rural background,
or at least it was kind of their childhoods, but not like thousands of years ago.
Yes, and this character, when he lands in this space, and we see the first thing we see is the first establishing panel of this place is that you've got lush vegetation and architecture, and the architecture even has styled in a way that is familiar from mythic illustrations of castles and the like. But there's also these little Kirby touches to it that are familiar to us from New Gods. So again, Kirby keeps introducing this idea from Thor to New Gods to, I think, touched on here, this idea of myth being with us. And he just indicates that by making it slightly more futuristic. But it still has the shape of like the usual signifiers of myth. Castles, helmets, winged beasts, space knights, things like that. So yeah, it's very on theme, let's say, for Kirby.
So, I mean, this story, it kind of follows the theme and variations, but it's more of a variation, but I think it's kind of subtle. I mean, you have to really kind of notice, like, oh, his new reality is different from the other two, and then, and the reason why that it kind of doesn't take, and he's in that world for the rest of his normal life.
But also the final page reassures us that the Monolith's project isn't a failure as such, because there's other seeds out there, and in fact he encounters one. So, like, you win some, you lose some, basically. It's no big deal. The future progress is assured. The future will be a better place because the seed is taking root, and you're going to have this other civilization emerge on the galactic stage, which I guess is the whole point of the Monolith. It's this future-oriented mover of people, of intelligence. He's really engaging with it in an interesting way. When limited to don't create the next, Prince Caspian, and he goes, okay, I won't. But like his entire mythos is going to be established in an issue. We're just going to do the entire idea of knightly romance and just knock it on the head and move on to the next thing, which is amazing.
Coming up, Kirby imagines a future where society has reached peak superhero cosplay. What happens when someone has blurred the line between fantasy and reality? First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin Podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin Podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
So the last panel of this issue says, "Are you ready for this? Coming next, Norton of New York, 2240 AD." But when you get to the next issue, it's become 2040 AD. I'm wondering, maybe he was thinking he decided it was too far ahead to jump.
Yeah, maybe. And dear listener, we were not ready. We were not ready for Norton of New York. It's possibly, like I said, like this is what I was referring to at the start of the conversation. Maybe one of my favorite things he's ever done, because it's just so strange. Not in, oh my God, my brain is broken, but in a, I can't believe he just pulled this off, and it actually works. It works as it works in a similar way to a lot of the exercises we've seen in Commandy. Where we had the issue of Commandy with the Civilization of Apes worshipping Superman's costume, or the androids who think they're gangsters. This idea of simulating a sort of heroic culture, and here you have this notion of a fantasy completely consumed. Sorry, I'll start again. A society completely consumed by the fantasy of superheroes and living like a superhero. And, I will take the Pepsi challenge of reading this and Grant Morrison's The Filth. I will do that. or Flexmentalo. And this will win. Because it's less conceited. It's just like let's just shoot from the hip. You're wasting your lives.
well, let's explain it. So this is another two-parter, and since we're only doing through issue 5 this time, we'll just talk about part 1, Norton of New York, 2040 AD, and the formula for this series is seemingly being abandoned here. So we start out with this superhero called the White Zero, and he's ruining the plans of a villain called Deathmaster. And then he encounters a monolith, and he recognizes it as being like the one they found back in 2001 on the moon. And by touching it, he says he knows it's the real thing. But then he falls through a trap door, and the superhero battle resumes, and he rescues the princess, but she looks kind of like Ethel Merman, and he's upset. And so then he wants to talk to the manager, and so we see this was all a simulation in this business establishment called Comicsville, where people can dress up as superheroes, and this business has set up adventures for you to go through. I think something kind of similar exists in the real world. I think, at least I know there are these like murder mystery things. What do they call those?
Yeah. Mystery rooms or whatever they're called. Yeah, where you have to solve to get out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, in this case, you have to defeat the villain. So he talks to the manager, and the manager suggests that Norton wants real adventure, and he should join the space program. And Norton's kind of dismissive of the idea. And he says to the manager, like, at least your monolith gimmick was a good one. And the manager's like, we don't have a monolith. So then we see Norton heading out to the actual New York of the year 2040, where the smog is terrible. And, of course, there's all kinds of technology, and a lot of it is kind of virtual reality, what we would call it now. And he goes the next day to this simulated beach where he can reach out and touch the wall that it's being projected on. And he starts feeling like he's trapped among illusions. And then the monolith appears again, and he starts to realize that he really should join the space program, and so he does. And then we see him 2 years later. He's exploring space with other astronauts, and they find a capsule containing a person who's in, I guess, suspended animation. And it's a woman with a very large head. And then their ship is fired on by some other ship, and Norton says, "Whatever happens now can only fulfill my destiny." And Kirby adds, "Whatever happens now will thrill us all. Come along for the wildest odyssey yet. The climax is a space out. Next, Intergalactica, the space out? Like, what, you just kind of go into a dream state? Oh, I'm spacing out. I don't know if space out meant the same thing back in the mid-'70s, but yeah, a lot of the issue is this simulated superhero adventure. Yeah, then he gets tired of the illusions and joins the space program, where, in science fiction, it can be really adventurous.
Yes, he's getting going on an adventure,
and you meet aliens,
and apparently it's just a job. But it's 2040, so I guess it could be just a job. It could be like that movie Ad Astra, where like Virgin are running flights to the moon, and that's just a thing you can do.
Another day, another alien.
A couple of things. The scene where he emerges from the simulation, and you've got all the other customers in their superhero gear waiting to go in, and they're making fun of him because it was too much for him. He couldn't handle it. And he's like, oh, grow up. Brilliant. So good. So I want that on my wall. I know I say this every time. I want it on my wall. I want that on my wall.
Well, it reminds me, and of course this happened later because Kirby anticipates everything, but the famous Saturday Night Live sketch where William Shatner is at the Star Trek convention. Yeah, get a life was the famous line from that. So it kind of reminded me of the get a life moment.
Absolutely. And the other thing I love is when he talks about the monolith. He says, "Oh yes, it's that monolith from 2001 AD."
Yeah, why does he say AD? Like, what else? Is he just maybe Kirby's just trying to make clear that he's talking about the year? But I mean, the title of this book is 2001, so duh.
Wasn't that the marketing for the film? It was always referred to as 2001 AD. Like there was a actual reference to Anno Domini.
I'm not sure
in some of the marketing around the film. But yeah, I thought that was very funny. 2001 AD. Oh yes, we all remember 2001 AD.
Well, of course, then we had AD and Commandy, which was what after. It was a different. After
you're right,
destruction, or I forgot what it was now.
But I really. I love this. Hands down,
disaster,
I love this.
I think it was.
After Disaster. It's just so funny. And even when he encounters the alien... Look, the thing we haven't mentioned in passing about any of these issues is that aliens within this version of 2001 is just a thing that's there. Like, there are aliens. And they keep popping up. And there's different kinds of aliens. And humanity's already encountered them a bunch of times. So that is something that's just as an aside. There's aliens. So
right, yeah, we didn't mention in the first issue the 2001 part of that story is that the guy is on. I think it was on an asteroid looking at doing archaeology, like somebody used to live there, and his partner gets eaten by an alien.
Yes,
some alien creature
drags him off. It's very Lovecraftian. But yeah, the alien that they encounter at the end of Norton of New York, in the next issue, he starts referring to her as princess. Like he's calling her an alien princess. So he's fully committed to the John Carter of Mars fantasy at that point. And they even talk about him, the other astronauts, they talk about him as a comic book nerd. Like he's known as a fantasist. So that's what I was saying, that I feel like Kirby sort of touched on that in the Marek issues and now is really going hard on, well, what does it do when a person really can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality? Like, what does that do to you? And what kind of person emerges at the other end? So he's trying to explore that. And now he's blown it up into, well, by the year 2040, we'll have an entire culture of people obsessed with superheroes. And they're just going to go around dressed as superheroes. It's
kind of true.
It's the cosplay scene on another level.
Yeah.
It's the people who go to conventions dressed as Spider-Man, and then they do that pointing meme. People take all the Spider-Mans pointing at each other, which has now become like a whole thing because of Into the Spider-Verse, because there were so many Spider people. Or Deadpool, people who dress up as Deadpool, or people who dress up as Sailor Moon or whatever, and there's these recognizable behaviors that you associate with the costume, so the person wearing the costume enacts those behaviors, and we'll go, oh, that's very funny, let me take a photo of you and post it on Twitter or whatever. That is something that we now experience. And Kirby's just taking it that one step slightly further, which is that, no, that's an actual lifestyle.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
we
it's
still got
already a
16
lifestyle.
years for this to come true, so maybe it'll still happen by 2040.
We're on track. We're definitely on track.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love this. I think it's very critical of the superhero scene in a slyly loving way. Like there is, what a name for a superhero, White Zero. Like it's like a mediocre racist. It's like the Nazis who are obsessed with the Ubermensch as a concept, and then Kirby comes with White Zero.
Sometimes I feel like a white zero. No.
Oh, white and nerdy. He anticipated white. Weird Al Yankovic's white and nerdy. No, I want to own this issue physically. We're reading a digital version of this, and I think it's highly underrated within the sort of Kirby canon. And given that he is so almost exclusively discussed as a superhero creator, when he made huge inroads, as we've talked about before, into romance and into war comics and into dramas, and he actually had a great nous for like political observation. The fact that this is the 2001 issue concerned with superheroes, and I'm going, oh my god, I love it. Like, maybe that's telling, but I also feel that it's a science fiction story. It's not a superhero story. It's treating of superheroes within a science fiction context.
Right.
And doing it in a really interesting way. I mean, this could be a Harlan Ellison short story. Like it's on that level of sort of let's explore this culture in a critical way and see what we come away with. And what we come away with is this really disturbing and interesting and funny vision of a society obsessed with superheroes. That's a little too familiar to me in the year 2024.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, we'll finish this story and meet Mr. Machine next time. It'll be a space out.
That's beautiful, Tim. Well done.
Jack Kirby's 2001 series has been out of print for a long time, perhaps in part because of those concerns about rights issues. Of course, there are copies on eBay, sometimes at pretty high prices. It can also be read on archive.org, which I'll link to in the show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on X, Facebook, or YouTube. Via our site, you can also shop on Amazon to support the show and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. And now you can also send us a voicemail. Find the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar of our site. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critique and Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week, Emmet and I move ahead with the second half of the 2001 A Space Odyssey series, issues 6 through 10, as Kirby decides to go ahead and create a new ongoing character anyway, none other than Machine Man. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.